Are starting with our meetup, uh, especially focused on Hacktoberfest. We will be talking about open source today and how it is helpful and why it should be important and why you should look into it. We have a veterinary speaker here who has a lot of experience with using, contributing, and being participant in the open source ecosystem. Uh, Help me welcome Siddhesh. I will let Siddhesh introduce himself a little better, so you have a better view. I'm going off screen, guys. Over to Siddhesh.
Okay, thank you, Swapnil. And I'll do like a full introduction by the end of the talk because that is the least important of all of the things that I'm going to talk about. So today we're going to talk about open source for fun and for profit. Um, it is hopefully a take on open source participation, contribution that will help you take something different from what you read uh, online. So let's just jump into it. So what specifically are we going to look at? We're going to look at what open source is about, and more importantly, what it isn't. And then we're going to deal with questions about participating, and we're going to try and find opportunities to participate on the way, right? How do you actually take part in the open source ecosystem, and then we'll explore questions, and hopefully you will have more questions because uh, that's probably a better way to deal with this topic than me just talking for like whatever an hour or however much time we have together. Okay, so to get started, what is open source? And this is something that you can easily uh, find online, right? Uh, Very specifically, open source is the software development model, which means that when you provide software to users, you provide the source code as well, and you develop that software in the open, right? So that essentially is the open source development model, right? However, the development isn't always done in the open, but in most cases it is done in the open. There are some projects that are run by a closed group, and then they tend to essentially throw out code at regular intervals. So that's essentially what open source is about, and it is centered around the idea of software freedom. And you must have heard phrases like free software and how free software does not mean open source software and all of that. So the distinction really is in the way you develop your software. So the open development, essentially, if you're following that, you're essentially doing free software as well. And when you talk about free software, you're talking about freedoms, right? Free as in freedom, not free as in like a free cup of tea, right? So there are four freedoms specifically that you deal with. So you have freedom zero, which is uh, the freedom to run a program, right? Then you have the next freedom, which is the freedom to study how the program works, the freedom to modify the program and use the modified program the way you see fit, right? Which uh, essentially makes it necessary for the source code of the program to be available. And then you have the next freedom, which is to the freedom to distribute your work. And then you have the final freedom, which is the freedom to distribute your modified versions of whatever software that you've got, right? Without any hindrance. So these four freedoms essentially make up your free software, open source software, uh, and that's the underlying basis pretty much of how the open source software or the free software ecosystem works, right? The idea of open source, however, can be extended beyond software, and you yeah, so I often like to talk about the open source ecosystem, which extends beyond software as well, right? And I think that's one of the themes for Hacktoberfest anyway, this year, which is to explore avenues to contribute to open source beyond software, because software is really a very small part of the ecosystem. It is an important part, but it is a very small part of it. And then you have the underlying ideas for the open source development model, which led to the development of something called as the open source way. I have a link in there which you can read more about. So that essentially extends the concept of the open source model of development to the open source way of conducting yourself in teams, in life in general, right? Okay, so what open source is not, and the first one is very basic, right? That it is not necessarily free. So when you talk about free software or software freedom, you're talking about freedom to do things with that software. It doesn't imply that the software is free, right? Businesses make money off open source software. Individuals make money off of open source software consulting. So there's money involved there. You might argue that the source code is often available on whatever forge, right? On GitLab, GitHub, or whatever, what have you, right? But uh, that is not always true. So it is possible for organizations to develop open source software, uh, package it, and distribute the source code only to customers who are using the software. And that is also open source, right? Because the target users are getting access to that software. Of course, those users can then redistribute that software because the license allows that. It's an open source friendly license. So businesses that usually do that will have some value add, which uh, which makes the software bits themselves not as critical to their business value as is the rest of the ecosystem. So it's not free as in supermarket samples, but it is free as in freedom, in the sense that you're allowed to do whatever you want with it. You're allowed to participate in those communities. You're allowed to form a community around software. The CentOS community, for example, is a community that essentially formed around a distribution that is based on Red Hat Enterprise Linux. So you you look at it that way, right? The freedoms are essentially things that allow you to do these kind of things. The other very important point that I want to drive home about open source is that it's not a charity, right? It is not uh, something that you donate to when you're participating in open source. There is an entire economic ecosystem around open source software, right? You have developers, you have companies, you have governments that depend on this entire ecosystem now. So there are non-profit, not-for-profit foundations, but then even the donors to those foundations are not donating for charity. They're donating to make sure that projects that those foundations control or uh, maintain, those projects survive, and those projects will have strategic importance for those donors. So that is essentially the ecosystem. It is not a case of, you can't really equate contributing to open source to contributing to, say, forest conservation or to eliminate poverty. So they're not the same thing, right? So when you contribute to open source, you don't look at it as a charity. So why would you want to participate? And this is where we get into the meat of things, right? So I've listed uh, the reasons to participate as essentially a priority scale, priority list, right? So the foremost reason to participate in open source software is to learn and build skills, right? A lot of skills, uh, especially in the software industry, but also outside of the software industry. There's skills that you can attain only when you're working in a job. Like traditionally, that was the only way to do that. You get a job in a tech company, you get a job in a marketing company, and only then you learn to do certain things. Whereas the open source ecosystem has changed that. It has brought all of that out into the open now, right? So if you want to learn a skill, uh, be it artwork, be it writing, be it making videos, uh, any sort of multimedia, right? Or writing code, you can now do it in the open, right? You have projects, you have groups that are building things that are used by the world, as it were, and you can participate in that now, and you can hone your skills as you participate in them. So it's probably, like, in my opinion, it is probably the best tool to learn skills and to build new skills. uh, the other important thing is to earn money, and that kind of pulls in from my previous slide where I mentioned that it's not free as in, you know, as in cost. It's free as in freedom, right? And open source, participation in open source is a very good economic decision. It is a very good financial decision from a personal perspective, right? Uh, One of the direct ways that people tend to earn money is by contributing to a project. Uh, like, you get hired by a company. So I essentially do that. I'm hired by a company to work on open source projects. Similarly, you could get contracted by various companies to contribute specific things to a project, be it DevOps, be it code, be it artwork, be it multimedia. So you're paid by a company to participate in that project. The other uh, financial incentive is that your contributions are your resume, right? Because of the open nature of the open source ecosystem, everything that you do is out there in the open, and you can use that to build your portfolio, right? Be it a software portfolio, be it your writings, be it any other creative content that you may have made, or any events you may have organized. So all of that is out in the open, right? Like when Swapnil and his team organized this meetup, you know them now, right? And you go back to your org, you you let's say you cross paths again 3 4 years later, and you're looking for someone who can do events, who can do developer outreach, uh, and you somehow come across one of these team members, you'll instantly recognize them, right? Because you attended that session, uh, you know that they're capable of doing that work. So open source helps you do that. Open source helps put you out there and essentially make it easier for people to hire you for the services that you provide, right? You go from being a labor market participant, as it were, where you are treated as part of a whole, which is like an industry. You go from that to being someone who is identified specifically for their skills, right? And of course, the other important thing that you get from open source, and a very strong reason to participate is to make friends. And the interesting thing about making friends over here is that it's not friends in your block, or it's not friends in your city. It's friends across the world, and that adds a very different perspective to your life, and it enriches your life in a way that you would never imagine in any other circumstance. uh, One reason why you should not participate, and I've mentioned this before, and that is for charity. uh, no maintainer appreciates charity when it comes to open source contributions. And when I say charity, there is a certain mindset that comes in when you're donating, your creative content to a project. And I've seen that happen time and time again with contributors, where they think that by contributing code or contributing artwork to a project, they're doing the project a favor. And when you go into a project with that mindset, with that philosophy, it is bound to come back on you, because nobody in the open source community is looking for favors. It is not so. A lot of communities are understaffed. Uh, they're dying to welcome developers. They're dying to welcome, content creators. But they also want contributors who will do it as part of the community, and not as a donation that you throw over the wall. So that is one very important thing to keep in mind when you're looking to participate. If you think you're participating to help the project, find yourself another reason also to do that, which is a reason uh, that appeals to you as a person, right? And makes you happy as a person. And it shouldn't just be, the feel good of donating your creative content to someone. Right. So hopefully I have uh, persuaded you as to why you should participate in open source software. Now we'll tackle some questions that I have got from people over the years, or almost like a decade and a half, as to their reservations of contributing to open source software. And this is just the beginning. I'm hoping that we'll get more questions, and I'll be able to at least point you in some direction that is useful, if not answer your questions. So, question zero, or the very first question is, do I belong? Right? And it's a question that you ask when you join like sessions like these, and that is, do I belong to this open source ecosystem? And the answer to that is yes, you do, right? Regardless of who you are, what your background is, your age, your gender, your sexual preferences, your caste, your race, none of that matters, right? You belong. What you need to find out is what part of the ecosystem you belong in, and be part of that, right? And work towards getting into that. So this is like a quick question, right? You belong, and you got to be here. So the next question is probably the most important, and it is the central theme of Hacktoberfest 2022, which is OSS all about software? Uh, and I'm going to give you a nuanced answer over here. So open source is a software development model, right? Uh, so in that very strict definition, it is about software, right? But when we talk about open source contribution or participation, we do not talk about software. We talk about the OSS ecosystem, right? And the ecosystem is much larger than the software. Software is just a part of it. So you participate in that ecosystem and not just that software. If you're a software developer, that's perfect. You fit into that slot, right? But then there are many other roles that are just as critical, and they need participants, right? So I have listed some of the roles over here, right, in this slide, and I'll just quickly walk through them. So supporting users is one role that's very important, and I don't know how many times we've thanked uh, contributors, participants in open source projects in GNC, for example. We have a libc help mailing list where uh, maintainers and contributors answer questions of users, right? Uh, Issues that users may have that may not necessarily be bugs, issues that users may have that may be bugs, and then you help categorize those bugs, right? You don't necessarily need to be technical to do that. You can categorize those as, like a front end issue or a back end issue, or something else. So supporting users, making them feel part of the community is a very, very critical role that you can try and fill if you're not technical, right? Or if you're not into software development, right? Supporting developers, which is something that I've not mentioned, but it is an extension of supporting users, is another way where you provide help with infrastructure for project maintainers. That's uh, one aspect that often gets overlooked. Something like setting up CI, right? You don't have to be a programmer to do that. It's essentially like a DevOps sysadmin role where the CI feedback becomes a very, very valuable input for the development team to decide the direction in which they're going, right? Another avenue is testing. Now, testing can be uh, technical QE, right, which you do, and it can even be regular user validation, where you are a responsible user who makes sure that they report every issue that they see to the project. And project maintainers really, really, really value those kind of users, right? Back in 2006, 2007, when I was working on an instant messenger, there was this one distribution called Puppy Linux. I don't know if it exists today, but that distribution maintainer used to use the instant messenger that I was working on, and he would regularly file bugs, right? He would regularly file issues that he ran into while he was using the messaging software, and that was probably the most valuable input I had uh, as maintainer, and I really, really valued that. He did not participate in code. He did not do anything of that sort, but he gave feedback very regularly, and which helped me develop the messenger in the direction that worked for him, right? So user feedback, user validation, testing, that's another avenue to be actively involved and be recognized as a participant in that community. Documentation, right? Documentation can range from technical documentation to doing tutorials, to doing videos of usage or uh, um, troubleshooting of some software, right? That is another very, very valuable uh, contribution to the OSS ecosystem for like specific projects. Then there's artwork that you can do. All projects want artwork and they need artwork, right? If you look at Hacktoberfest, they've had different kind of themes and logos over the years, right? And that's not just a uh, so that could be controlled by a company, but then in the open source ecosystem, you would probably have like something like GNC, for example, or GCC. The artwork was created out in the open by contributors. Fedora project has a complete like art design team, and you could participate in that, and flex your creative muscles over there. Then you have website maintenance. That's one thing that's always uh, necessary for open source projects. And then there's outreach, right? One caveat I want to give about outreach is that a lot of people, especially those who are technical, unfortunately, seem to think that outreach is the low-hanging fruit that you involve yourself into, and then you build into other teams. And it's probably something that works for some people, but in a lot of cases, outreach ends up getting underestimated as a task in the open source ecosystem. And that's one of the things that I often discourage, especially if someone has uh, if someone's goal for participation in an open source project is to say do artwork, or maintain the documentation, or be a code developer. So if that is your goal, outreach is not where you should be. There are beginner friendly ways to get involved in those roles. uh, Outreach is a dedicated and in many ways an expert role. It is not it's not a place where interns enter to like get into other roles, right? If you're passionate about outreach, yes, go for it, but that's not an entry point to other roles within a software project. And finally, ask the project, right? If there is a project that you're really passionate about, uh, reach out to the maintainers. Larger projects have developer relations, right? So reach out to the developer relations representatives, and talk to them, and tell them about your interests, and they will help you find. They, they'll be more than happy to help you find an interest that aligns with the project. So talk to them, and I think that's going to be a theme, uh, that you need to talk to the maintainers to understand what's going on, and how you can be involved. So next question. So this is a question that gets asked explicitly at times, but often whenever I allude to this, that there are a lot of nodding heads. Unfortunately, we're online, so I cannot see any nodding heads over here. But I'm hoping a lot of you are nodding, saying that yes, I do feel like it's this overwhelming uh, uh, thing, and I don't know how to get involved in like these large projects. Like you look at the Linux kernel, and you go to kernel.org, and you're like, where do I get started? This is such a huge thing. And uh, to answer that question, it is kind of hard to get involved, but it's not in the way many people think. The work itself is not the hard part. And like I said, most projects have uh, newbie friendly uh, uh, ways to get involved, right? And they have avenues to welcome newcomers in the project. Like the Linux kernel has kernelnewbies.org for people who want to get involved in the technical side of things. Uh, so you will find ways for projects to get involved in the projects. The difficulty is in other areas, and it's something that a lot of people don't recognize until they've kind of taken the step into starting to contribute. So the first difficulty is that you're participating publicly, and there is an overriding fear of failure, right? Because your mistakes, whatever mistakes you make, are public, and they're going to be public forever, right? But your achievements are also public, so that's a positive to take from the whole thing, right? So how do you deal with this? So the easiest way to deal with that is to reach out to project maintainers and developer relations. They're there to help. They're there to help you get started. If you're not, uh, if you're really anxious about posting your ideas on public lists, public mailing lists, reach out to them personally, get feedback from them personally first. And many of them, I, for one, would be very happy to help out in projects that I work on, right? Be it patches, be it artwork, be it whatever it is. I would love to give you feedback personally, and then you can use that to make a more public proposal. The other thing that you can do uh, to override this fear is to wear your failures. And what I mean by wearing failures is, well, you don't have to literally wear your failures, but I don't know if you can see my T-shirt here. So this is a commit that I found out some years ago. So I had made this commit in 2013 to GNU the GNU C Library project, and it featured on this website called codecrap.com or something like that, right? Because it is a stupid mistake. I had there was a macro called two, and I had assigned -2 to it. So it was an utterly stupid mistake, and I felt ashamed of it at the time. But then it was what it was. And I decided that I'm going to wear that failure, which is I made a t-shirt out of it. And I wear it every day to remind myself uh, that I'm going to make mistakes. And one important thing about making mistakes is that the more you're contributing to a project, the more mistakes you're going to make. What is important is how you get out of those mistakes and the fact that you be there to fix your mistakes, right? Your presence is more important than your accuracy. The year that I made this mistake, for example, was also the year where I was one of the top three contributors to the project. So there is always that context, and you need to remember that context, that you're making mistakes, but you're also making progress. As long as you're making progress, it is okay. And that acceptance of your own mistakes is probably something that you need to work on personally, right? But you have maintainers, you have mentors in your project available for you. Reach out to them and talk to them so that they will help you build, yourself into that community. The other difficulty with contributing to open source is, again, it's not related to code, it's not related to the content, it's not related to the actual stuff that gets in. It's related to your participation and the fact that people participating in the project that you intend to participate in come from all over the globe. They come from every corner of the entire world, right? And the only way you can be successful in that scenario is when you learn about the people you're collaborating with. You learn uh, about how to work with them. Learning about globally inclusive language, for example. Like in India, uh, things like blacklist and whitelist, they don't matter because those words mean nothing to us, right? Uh, but if you look at it from the global context, especially from an American context, that has uh, a very specific meaning which alludes to racial profiling. And we need to be conscious of that, and we need to understand that uh, when we're working with folks around the world, we need to make sure that uh, we're not offending them, and we're working with them, and we're getting the best out of them, right? As well as them being able to get the best out of us. So that's probably the second most difficult thing about contributing to open source, and it is something that you can work on. It's not hard, right? It is something that you can build into yourself. And you know what? The other side of this coin of participating globally is what I had mentioned before, which is you have friends around the world, and you basically become a better, richer person for that, because you suddenly have uh, perspectives on things that you could never have had before, right? If you were just part of like a small community in say a city, or even in a country for that matter. So it is hard, but it comes with wonderful fruits if you surmount that. So final question is, how do I get started? And as is always the case, it depends, right? But then a general guideline is that uh, you you identify the project that you want to be involved in, right? And you identify the project for the right reasons for yourself. Again, it's not about charity, it's about what you are going to gain from it. And you have to be very selfish about that, right? Because through your selfishness, you're going to contribute something amazing to the world, right? That's the way I believe in participating in open source, right? So you identify the project that works for you, that will do something useful for you, right? Read their contribution guidelines. Almost every major project has a contribution guideline or a contribution checklist. If they don't have one, they're happy to add one to suit their project. Look for newbie friendly tasks in those projects, and usually the contribution guidelines will tell you how to look for that, right? So C Python, for example, labels some issues as easy, which means that someone who's getting started with contributing to the C Python interpreter, they can look into those issues, and those issues could range from website to C Python itself, right? Uh, so look for those kind of tasks. If the projects have meetings, like Fedora used to have IRC meetings, I don't know if they do anymore. For glibc, we have a call every Monday where we do patch triage, right? Just attend those meetings and listen. There's nobody charges you for listening. And what happens is that maybe the first like dozen or so meetings you have nothing to say, right? And you have nothing to contribute. But maybe on 13th meeting, you might find something that kind of piques your interest, and you want to work on it. And you know what? You have maintainers right there that you can ask directly. You can tell them that I want to work on this, but I've never done this before. Can someone help me get started with it? And they would absolutely be willing to help you out, because you've been there for the dozen calls. You've heard them. You've been part of that group, right? So they will get you involved. They'll try like 101% to try and get you involved, right? And if all of those avenues are not available, like the meetings and IRC, Slack, whatever it is that the project will be using, reach out to the maintainers. Reach out on their mailing lists or Discord or whatever it is. Uh, and like I said, many maintainers are helpful off list too. I am available off list. If you have any questions in the GCC, glibc, the GNU toolchain space, I'm always open to someone emailing me personally and asking for my advice to get involved in those projects. So reach out to maintainers; they're there to help. All right, so that's what I had in terms of content, and I was banking on the fact that there will be questions. So if there are any, now is the time to ask. So before I end, this is my introduction. Like I've been contributing to open source for over 15 years, uh, and I've had patches in that number is outdated. It's not 80. That's probably over 100 now open source projects. Uh, the reason for that is quite complicated. I could probably get into that some other time. And right now, I'm more interested in toolchain security. I work on uh, toolchain projects like GCC, the GNU C Library, and the ecosystem around it. So that's all I have. Thank you so much. And yes, questions, please. Yes, Aditya shared a link to codecrab.com. Yes.
Hey Siddhesh, thank you for walking us through your experiences, and it was a really nice session. We didn't have any
Thank
questions
you.
so far. I am not expecting to come any anytime soon, but we can see your socials on the screen. So hopefully, if there are any folks who have questions, they might reach out to you.
Thank you. It was a
Thank
pleasure.
you. By that, we conclude this session. Thank you everyone for attending.